What? More sheets? No, it's big fun. I really don't. I think most questions really should be addressed to him, but I guess my topic of discussion today is the experience of growing up in America, specifically because we're going to be organizing a Shabbaton with Rage in Brighton Beach, and that is going to be my generation of, like, the children of immigrants that have come to this country is very different than my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation. Culturally and just in every single way possible. I think what the issues that we're mostly trying to address today with the Russian Jewish youth in America and in Israel is that there's no real sense of belonging. That Russian Jewish youth today, we're not really Russian because we were born here. We're not really American because we come from families with different languages and funny food, and we're not really Jewish because we don't look like the typical yeshiva kids. So these kids end up a lot of times getting lost in between all these different labels, and I think that's what we're going to be working with mostly in Brooklyn. You end up seeing that most of these kids end up sticking together. Like if I look on my Russian friends' Facebook pages, they're 17 years old, they were born in America, they grew up in either Brooklyn or New Jersey, and all the friends posting are named Masha and Alex and Nikolai, and they're all raving about the book that they had the night before. So they're very strongly Russian, they stick together, they don't want to, even though they go to usually public schools with many different ethnicities, Jews, non-Jews, they still stick together, they feel this kind of bond. I mean, similarly to what you see among Persians also in Green Neck. It's a similar situation you see happening. Lisa asked me to discuss my experience of growing up as a daughter of immigrants, which it's not a drama story, it's not a pity story. Thank God everything was fine. I didn't speak English until I started school, which was difficult. I was definitely named as the Russian kid. My mother made a long braid for me every single morning, and I had these little jumpers that was very different than what the other girls were wearing. Yeah, I had different food. My parents had accents. We had a totally different lifestyle than the rest of the other kids. Every Sunday we would go to the museum or ballet or something, which is like if I'd come back on Monday and tell my friends, yeah, I went to the Nutcracker, they'd be like, what? You know, they didn't understand what that was. And for us that was very important. I think that in Russian families like ours, culture is something that's, I mean, I don't know if you read the essay that Elisa handed out, but that I wrote 2 years ago in Jewish Week. Culture is like God for some of these for a lot of Russian families, and it affects like our very dynamic with other people. It affects this art, music, theater, social gatherings. This is the ideal. Like when I call my grandparents and ask them what they're doing, how they're doing, how they're feeling, like they don't even. All that categorizes how they're doing is the list of shows that they've seen in the past week, poetry gatherings, and the parties at Russian restaurants that they've gone to, and the ones they're planning for the week to come. That's how we almost live life. I think Mr. Oshrin was addressing this on last week at our first meeting. He was saying that the Russian Jewish people are really very spiritual, in the sense that they don't, instead of going to shul on Friday nights, they go to concerts, and that's one thing that I found very true. And it's understandable because there was no such thing as religion in that time and place. Also, you have to understand, I guess, when we're dealing with Russian American teenagers, is that the social dynamic is very different. We kiss each other when we greet each other, no matter boy, girl, how you're related, if you're not. It's just what's respectful. We buy each other flowers for birthdays, for occasions, for graduations. At family parties, someone always whips out a guitar and starts strumming a song, like this non-conformist song, anti-Soviet underground groups. But 30 years later, this is still what we're singing. So whatever it is, we're singing karaoke at these parties, we drink tea all the time, we snack on sunflower seeds, we have stuffed cabbage for meal, like whatever these typical Russian things, that's what it's like. It's just different. And most importantly, families to center. The cousins are called bratia and sestry, they're called brothers and sisters. It's not first cousin, second cousin, third cousin. They're all your brothers, they're all your sisters. Clearly, whatever you do, your family's here with you. You're always together. And there's no such thing as going to a friend's house without having interaction with your parents, with their parents. Like, I would go to my American friends' houses, and their parents would be somewhere. Like I would just play with a friend, and then afterwards when I would leave, I felt like I had to go find the parent and say thank you to them for having me at their house. And I'd like run around these big American houses trying to find the parents to say thank you, and I thought it was crazy. But that's just, I mean, within a Russian culture, that's normal. There's something about formality, and there's something about the intimacy of it. Maybe it's not Russian, maybe it's a European thing, I don't know what it is. About Russian teenagers, specifically the ones we'll be working with, is that they are very conscientious academically, but they also know how to have a good time. The kids I grew up with in the summer bungalows were the types who go clubbing all night long. The next morning wake up at 6 a.m. and score 1,600 on the SATs. Those were the types. And Russian immigrant parents, like any other immigrants, have very high standards for their children, specifically because they want their kids to achieve exactly what they never had the opportunity to do, whether it's an Ivy League school or it's a very good salary. That's what they expect, and not just from the child, for that child's personal, for their own sake, but also for the family's sake. Whatever you do as a child is considered a contribution to the family, and if you don't succeed, if you're not ambitious, if you don't try hard, it's seen almost as if you're being selfish, or you're not at least appreciating the things that your family has done for you. It's a typical immigrant guilt trip, we came to this country for you to do well, why are you not doing well? So I think that a lot of Russian kids are living up to these kinds of expectations. At the same time, because we're so set on, I think, being so ambitious career-wise and academically, which is wonderful, there is no strong sense of volunteerism. So if I would tell my grandparents, yeah, my high school's taking us to pack Tomchei Shabbos, or, last year I tutored a girl for High Lifeline. They didn't understand that just because I wasn't being paid, I wasn't really learning anything, so why am I doing it? I'm not getting any personal gain from that. I think it's because maybe they wanted, I don't know why, they really wanted this capitalist idea of, you work for the best, you work for yourself. They didn't, this whole Jewish idea of chesed was just very strange to them. They didn't understand why you would do that. If you're not studying, you're not making money, and you're not enjoying yourself, what's the point? And enjoying yourself is, I think, a very big part of what I understand Russians to be like. Generally, Russians, I think, aspire to be, how I see them, and within the family that I grew up, is that they want to be the Renaissance people. We want to try everything and be everything. We want to study art, be experts on physics, be chess champions, try the gourmet shrimp, black caviar, go out on Friday nights and dance, wear whatever you want, and be able to come back and say, I went and did this. And if you don't, you're kind of missing out on life's blessings and blessings that you've gotten in America, which I think is why Russian Jewry is sometimes, especially to now, is very reluctant, like my father said, to be really interested in religion, because religion for them is limitations. Halakha is just odd and narrow-minded. And for them, it seems as if we came to this country so you could blossom, so you could grow, so you could do the things you never were able to do. Why should you limit yourself by not turning on a light on Shabbat? Why should you not go out to this restaurant or miss this important business lunch on Saturday afternoon? And this, I think, accounts for a lot of hostility that you'll see between Russian Jews and the Orthodox Jews. I lived in Brooklyn for the summer, and I saw this, and the bungalow area where we stay over the summer is also like this. You see the Russians and the Haredim or Hasidim, and there's a very interesting interaction that goes on. Let's just say interesting. Because they just don't understand each other. The Russians don't understand how could you be limiting yourself so much. So I think, again, about Judaism for Russians is not necessarily a religious thing, but it's very cultural. And the cultural aspect is cherished, I think. Russians are interested in learning about the holidays, the traditions. Rage has an online newsletter, Yevreiskiy Mir, which is very popular in the Russian community in Brooklyn. There's a radio show that goes on, run by Rabbi Lev Katzin, and people listen to it. A lot of, my grandparents discuss it all the time. My relatives will come to our house, and they'll sit and discuss traditions and stories that they've heard, and something that they've learned whether on the radio or reading. They're very interested in it, and they'll ask us questions. Specifically, my great uncle Vladimir, who's a total secular engineer from Kiev, published a book in Russian called Galut, which is a history which he himself wrote about Jewish communities and synagogues. He gives lectures and book signings. People are interested. People buy the book. They're, however secular they are, there is something deep down. People, I think, do yearn for whatever it is that Judaism might offer. Every year we have our secular relatives for the Pesach Seder, and one of the best toasts that's made, because of course there are a lot of toasts aside from the 4 cups. The best toast every year is one of my uncles gets up and thanks my parents and says that spasiba for having us every year, because every year this is the one night in which we remember that we're Jewish. And they appreciate that reminder. They appreciate that reminder. It means something to them in a deep way that I think spans many generations, and in some ways speaks to whatever nostalgia they might have had, they might have for past generations, for their grandparents and great-grandparents, whatever they learned about the shtetl. And one more thing that I think is important when we're going into this Raid Shabbaton, and generally going to Ukraine, is that one big element that speaks to a lot of Russians and inspires and really riles them up is Israel. I think that Russians find, even the ones living here especially, have a very special place for the country, and they will, I can't even tell you how many conversations I've had with uncles or family friends or something, and we're discussing Israeli politics. They get so passionate, and they get, like, I remember during the Lebanon War, we were having tea with Sergey, and he was sitting, and we're discussing Lebanon War, and he's sitting there, and he's getting upset, and he's like, I wish I could go there now. I would be fighting Hezbollah now. But they get really, really upset. They get really, it matters to them so much. And I think why Israel matters so much is because in the Soviet Union, Russians had a very clear understanding of what it means to be different. There was no escaping. As you said, faces and accents were unmistakably non-Russian. Even if you're smart and talented, you're not going to get into the university. And that knowledge of being different continues to be here in some ways. And it gave, I think, Russian Jewry an understanding of why we need the state of Israel, and why we need our own land. And even though there's plenty of Russian Jews living outside of Israel, it's still something very important, still something always discussed. And I mean, even again at our Pesach Seder, I always remember my Aunt Anya every year. She says at the end when we say next year in Jerusalem, she's totally secular. I really don't know how much she knows about Judaism. But every year she says at the end, next year, when we say next year in Jerusalem, she gets a little bit like teary, and she says like, ah, what a beautiful phrase, what a beautiful phrase. I think there's a certain idea of a yearning for, I don't know how to say this in English, like, I don't know, yearning for Israel, and Israel has a very strong place in, Israel has a very strong place in Russian Jewry's heart, which you can read about more in Elie Wiesel's Jews of Silence. He writes a lot about that. But yeah, I think that's something that should be, that we can use, I think, specifically in in speaking to these teenagers or elderly or whoever, when you go to Ukraine. I think Eliza was saying that we should be bringing pictures. Like if you bring a picture of the kotel to this elderly person and who's homebound in this tiny apartment, that means something to them because they know of that, and that speaks to something not just spanning even a few generations, but 2,000 years.
Yeah, just for either one of you, my only really exposure to like Russian culture as a kid was like my very strict Russian piano teacher. Is classical music like a big part of Russian culture also?
Yes.